Hi there. Welcome to today's lecture. Um, as you can see, I'm in a different setting, and the reason because for that is because I am at a small procedure on my foot, which has me bed bound now. But I don't need any sympathy from you. Dis nie nodig om vir my jammer te wees. We're continuing our discussion on the exegetical and hermeneutical context, which I want you to start practicing in. So I am going to share my screen. If I can quickly share screen, this one. Now I'm going to share this. Although it says TLH231, it's also TLH331, but because there is some overlap in your module for this week. And that is because I wanted to do some revision on exegetical methodology. I will post this PowerPoint on my notes later on, but I hope to also create this video into a transcription so that you can have it as a class notes also, and then the pictures will be part of that. Just to remind you, in the previous lection, I said we are going to work with a adaptation of the Lectio Divina process. And I explained to you that it is about reading the Bible simultaneously over again, searching for insight, and that you get the knowledge, then you interpret the knowledge, then you gain further depth in the knowledge, and eventually you ask about the application of the knowledge. So the hermeneutical process that I'm going to go over with you now will show you then how to understand what this is. Ideally, it would be nice if you could start reading the texts that has been described for you. I think, for example, in your my activities number 2, where you have to read different texts for each year group, which you can then share with your family or a friend or even a classmate. And no, I'm not saying you can make a group project of that, but I'm saying that you can actually start reading and comparing notes. That's the thing I want you to do. This is a very basic understanding of what exegesis is. First of all, I hope you can see my mouse. That is the medium. We work with the text of the Bible, the medium, and that is the place where you find, that's where you start reading. Secondly, there is a sender, the person who wrote the text, and who made sure that we have it today. Then after that, you have the first readers or the intended readers. This person wrote this for this people, these people. So there's always some sort of logical movement about that. When you see it that way, you will also know that then there is a specific message coming from the medium geared towards the first readers from the perspective of the sender. So the first layer of interpretation of a biblical text is not just to read the Bible and to say, what does this text say to me? Because you are way down the line of readers or receivers of the text, is you have to understand what is the message of this text in the context of the situation, making it relevant. Remember, we do not question the authority of the Bible on this stage. We never question the authority of the Bible in my mind. This is not about biblical historical criticism, what fits in the Bible and what does not. It's about a text immanent process where you simultaneously have a deductive method where you ask what is it saying and making a general conclusion, and an inductive message where you say I am asking questions into the text, and then I'm testing my test questions to make sure it is false or it is not false. So having said this, you read a text, you ascertain who wrote the text or the context of the text, you ascertain who was the first readers of the text, and this brings me to the social cultural context. It is necessary to understand how the world looks they are functioning. And then you find out, okay, this is the message of the text, and I understand the message of the text better because I understand something of the person who wrote the text. I understand something of the community who received the text for the first time. And I understand the world in which this text operated, the cultural context, the political context, the social, the religious. You can make a whole PhD study about this for yourself on only one aspect. So vast it is. But remember, we're going to look at the context for this text we're studying. We're not going to try and do everything at all at once. This brings me to the fact that the first readers are not the only readers. 2,000 years on, there have been a generation of subsequent readers in this text, starting from the first readers up until me and you today. And these subsequent readers all have a different perspective because they live in different cultures, they live in different contexts. So that influences the interpretation of this whole message medium thing. This implies that in every generation you have to look at the text from a fresh perspective, acknowledging that you are also a subsequent reader and asking, what is God telling me today, without drawing a straight line between this message and today. It's impossible because all these bridges that need to be crossed is necessary. I know I'm repeating myself from the previous lecture, but this is why it is so important for you to grasp the idea of exegesis. It is a responsible way of reading the Bible. And it is the only way we are going to use the Bible for theological formation, sermon preparation, eventually for better understanding what God is busy doing in this world. Remember, we are busy with a missional theology degree. So we're working with the perspective, we're on the same mission as God. God sent us on his mission, Father, Son, and Spirit, and he's equipping us, and he left his first revelation, his primary revelation for us to guide and aid us, and we need to find out how that story is told also today. Okay. This brings me by the first reading at the first reading of the text. The first thing you're going to do as part of your first reading is you're going to read through the pericope. Remember, I told you a pericope is a logical thought unit in the Bible, from verse this to verse that. Most of the pericopes in the New Testament and Old Testament are sorted. Coincidentally, the texts and the verses and the chapter was done by a monk in the 3rd century as a way to remember the texts easier, since they also at that stage did not live in a scripture culture, but an oral culture. So that's where that comes from. So you're going to take this pericope and you're going to describe it into the macro structure of the book. That means you must have an idea of what the rest of the book is about. You must have an idea what themes are going through this book. You must have an idea how this part of the message fits in what the writer tries to say according to the theme he's busy describing, or the issue he's handling, or etc. You must ascertain where this fits into the overall narrative of the book. Is this part of a new argument? Is this going on from an earlier argument? Is this part of the bigger argument of the book, the letter, the scripture? Can I place it within the context of the larger book. In certain books, it's easy. Paul's letters tend to have a unified thought thread. In the Old Testament, it's a bit difficult because the stories move in the narrative sections, and the Psalms have different themes that are put together in a poetical way. And the prophets tend to also go on with one thing and then they move to another thing. So the macro session is not necessarily always the whole book, but the part that makes a logical sentence, a logical sense as a coherent unit. So that is why you do step one in the first reading. So the best way is to read through the whole book in one sitting. The second best way is to take your notes that you're going to get or make for yourself on the outline of the book. So then you can plot where your text is standing in the outline of the book. And then you can see, okay, more or less the writer was busy with this theme. So this is supposed to fit in there. How? And then you can work from there. I hope you have a mug of coffee with you because I'm going to just take a sip of mine. I like coffee. I have a saying that says, but first coffee. In any case, the question about the genres of the book is an important thing to take into account when you start reading through the text. If you read a psalm, for example, you're busy with poetry. There are lots of metaphors. There are lots of descriptive ways linking to visual clues and cues. And if you then read a psalm as if it's a piece of systematic theology, you're going to get a different outcome than what the writer intended. So having an idea of what the genre is and placing the text that you're reading within the genre gives you the ability to say, I need to make sure that I understand the message as it was put forward through the way the language is used. It's not a story. It is a prophetic uttering, or it's a saying in Ecclesiastes or one of those books. And I need to make sure that I put that in the way. Let me give you an example. If you take a rugby game, for instance, and you read a very elaborate description of a game by somebody who really loved the specific team, even though the team lost. And you will read how he describes how the bull came in and put ears on the shark, and he was storming over the shark, and it was just a massacre in the end. So the points that reflected on the border on the board is not a true reflection of the game because the Sharks were the better team. No, the Sharks were not the better team because the Bulls were actually, and nobody can play sad worse rugby than the Sharks. So it is one of those things that needs to be rectified. If you read that and you think 200 years later, what is this guy telling about? And he never used the name rugby theme. You only know it's some sort of game. And you read this literally, you're going to think, how on earth will a bull be able to fight a shark and get points? So the genre helps you understand the context so that you can understand the metaphors and the visual language. Because language is interpretation of reality, just as speaking is. We all interpret what happened with us. We do it by stories and imagery and depictions of emotions, etc. Then the next thing, and this is like a technical thing. Sorry, I mixed my languages here. It's a very technical thing in the sense that you're going to enjoy it. Because now you're going to read through your text and you're going to ask what words are repetitive. Paul is writing and he's using Jesus, 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 or the Father, the Father, the Father, or he's saying grace this, grace that. Then you can mark this as an important thing that needs to be investigated. So you must take each of these repetitions and then get yourself in a sense of understanding to what is being said here. I once, when I spoke to people about this specific part of the process, said to them, put the text into a literally computer thingy and ask for a word count and create a word cloud, because the word cloud will pop out the words that were used more frequently. Obviously, words such as and this and the normally tend to skew the thing, but you get a very nice idea. I'm also apologizing. I have children, and they sometimes want me to be unprofessional, like I am now. Okay, so this second part is you're going to identify what is repetition, what is unique. Um, if you read through Paul once again, you will find that he from time to time uses the mystery of the gospel and the mystery of the message. And that is a way of telling that only those who believe in Jesus Christ will understand God's plan. And yet he doesn't say it in that sense. He just refers to the mystery. Good. This is a very, very nice exercise that will take quite a while, and you're going to read the text over and over. So please don't rush about this to get it finished. And using 3 lines for the function of each is you're going to try and establish what is this repetition, or what is this frequent usage of this word, or what is this strange word that doesn't fit into the rest of the pericope. What does it contribute? And there the broader context will help you, and the literary genre will help you. Um, the other day I preached from Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and if you read through that chapter, it's about sticks that can go, and it gets dark, and the maulers, what's it in English, will not work anymore. And the whole chapter for the first part is actually a metaphorical description of growing old, losing sight, losing mobility, losing your teeth. In biblical times, they did not have dentists like us, like we do. And if you have a frog teeth, then they pull out the teeth, and they don't have something else to give in, put back into. So it's different than today. But that text, if you don't know that, it means nothing. But then, understandably, when you see what's going on there, you find, oh my word, this is most beautiful visual imagery of how it feels to be on the old side of life. And why did he say that in Ecclesiastes? Where does this fit in? But that's a question for when we use that book. Okay, I've prepared a little uh, um, summary of the literary genres just to give you an idea. I've uploaded this already onto my notes. You will have that. So that you have a little frame of reference to say, okay, this fits in here, this fits in there. I assume that you know this already, so this is not necessarily new information or earth-shatteringly changing information in your life. Coincidentally, if you look at the Old Testament text, the festive literature, um, the old Jewish people used the books like Ruth, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, etc., in of they during the religious festivals. So they sung these books and they chanted these phrases, because that's how it worked in that time. Most of the psalms also were written or were used during temple services, and not like we know a church service today. It was a bit different, but eventually it provided a liturgical function, which we must also take into account when we read through the texts. Now you're going to the second text, the second reading, and this is where you will analyze the pericope. Now you're going to write down the primary part of the sentence is, this is the thing that is added to explain this word. This is the phrase that he added to explain that. Here he digressed and expanded on his argument. Let me give you an example. you can say the dog walked down the street. Okay. Or you can say, when the sun came up, the dog, who was busy looking for new smells to discover, caught eye of another dog across the street, and he walked across the street to go and greet that dog. A very longer sentence, and if you can establish what part of the sentence referred to and what is the main sentence in that, you will have an analysis of the structure of the pericope. If you are doing the Greek and the Hebrew studies, you will be learned to read the verbs and the grammar and the times, the tenses, so that you can see how that is being used. Especially Paul was used to love to use long sentences with lots of information to make one point. And because he thought it was necessary to adapt and to explain stuff that comes further on. He liked linking these arguments with one another. Okay, let me take a breather here. Good, I took a breather. During the third reading, you are going to look into the socio-historical context of this pericope. This is where you take the sources to your availability, and you start reading what did it look like in the time, how was the politics, what was the culture and the message, and so that you can get a increasingly clearer picture of what is going on, what went on in this world. Nehemiah, for example, tells us of the story of how the walls of Jerusalem and eventually the temple was rebuilt. But he started with being in Assyria or Babylonia, where he was banished to. And you can see that the way they spoke about letters and governors and administrators reflects something of the culture and the political movement of the time. And that's why there was so much that's why the people did not know what the real intention was. His was religious, and they thought he's rebuilding Israel back to a force to revolution, to come into revolution against the bigger power of the day. After that, and this is an ongoing exercise. Before I go on to point 5, you must know this is part of your lifelong Bible study process from here on your exegetical program. You need to become knowledgeable as much as you can on the context of the Bible, the socio-historical context. Language is always set into culture. Language not only reflects that culture, as I said in my previous lecture, but it also is an expression of that culture. And that means that the more you know about the people and the practices and the politics of the time in which those people lived, the better you're going to understand what they're saying. This is one thing that you must know. To study the Bible is not looking into the message alone. It's not looking into what did this text mean. This text meant something different if you do not look in what happened in that time. You are going to identify exegetical and theological problems, stuff that doesn't make sense, stuff that is complicated, and issues that you need to look into. And that's where you must start using commentaries. Doing this BTH degree, where you not necessarily are learning how to exegete the texts from an original language standpoint, it is better to go and look what other researchers, scholars wrote about the text that you are studying. I would like to suggest that you normally use a minimum of 3 commentaries. And if you are wondering what commentaries to read, they frequently comes in new commentaries, but there are older commentaries that is very good and withstood the test of our times and changes in our culture to help you really understand the Bible in its context. I am currently looking for publications that will give us nice lists to get our own picture of I can use these and commentaries or that commentaries. But I'm not going to give it out as if I did it already. Finally, in the fourth reading, you are going to formulate the message, the meaning of this text in your own paragraph. This is where you come to the conclusion. I studied and I discovered, and I think this is what the writer tried to say. This is then the core message type of thing. So please don't go look for one thing only, but rephrase it in words that make sense to yourself as you have started now to study, and the conclusion is yours, and you must grow into the insight of that conclusion. You must also ask the role of the context in which you read this pericope. Now, your context in Africa is the fact that you live in Africa, in a community in South Africa, with the issues geared or customized for that community you live and you work in. So you're not going to try and say, okay, what's Africa's big problem? And think all over the continent. You're going to be very context specific, and this is where the inductive reasoning comes in. You come and say, in our society, I see the following issues, and please don't go and generalize the corruption in South Africa and the problems with Eskom, etc., etc. Because when you use this pericope and you minister in a local congregation or in a local community, the context there is much more specific and much more relevant than wondering whether the president sold a buffalo or not, to take an example. Therefore, it's nice, and no, it's not nice. It's imperative that you also become a student of the world in which you must interpret this text. You must ask the questions into the text. If I look to this text, at this text, from this perspective we are currently suffering with, what does it teach me? How can I apply what I'm learning here from the text, and what's God's will for the situation? So the one thing I'm trying to prevent you to do is to overgeneralize what you read and make a deductive reasoning and say this is a ewigdurende waarheid, a never-ending, always in truth. Because though it is correct, this truth must be lived in different generations under different circumstances. And that is an important empirical, interpretive, hermeneutical filter for reading the Bible in your context. The message of the Bible doesn't change. What the writer said was written down, but you read it, and your context influences how you read it. And you need to not only acknowledge your context, but you should also start using your context to say, this is how I perceive reality. Now I'm reading this text. What does this text tell me of my reality and the perception? And how does the two work into one another? Not changing the Bible, but allowing me to get either better insight or challenge my presuppositions about things that's happening in our context. I'm giving you a short overview here because during the course of this module, this is the method I'm going to frequently, continuously return to enable you to use a method of reading the Bible. You can later on start reading up on hermeneutical and exegetical methods, and you can make your own choices with regards to narrative criticism and historical criticism and etc., because there are quite a lot of exegetical methods to study the Bible, and every one of them brings a certain perspective to help you understand the text better. But to expect of me and you even to know all that and incorporate all that when you read a single pericope in the Bible is, yeah, you're going to have a few very bad nightmares on did I read this and did I understand it correctly? So start with something basic like this and expand yourself into growing a new perspectives as you go on. The core, however, stays this. There's a sender. Know something about the sender. What was his intentions? What was his context? The medium. This is the language. This is the metaphors. These are the metaphors. This was the first readers and their context. This helped me to understand this better. And this is the message based on this. Now I'm going to ask in, what can I learn more if I see how the circumstances were of the people that was involved in this message? And then how does this play out in subsequent readers' hermeneutical filters? That's one of the reasons we're going to look into contemporary hermeneutical filters, and I'm going to give you a crash course with a summarized overview of some of the perspectives that helps us to understand the Bible in a better contextual way than today. Okay, this is not going to be a long lecture because I am now finishing. I am now finished. Let me make a remark on my notes activity 2. This framework will be the process you'll follow to study this text that I gave you, the text that leads to a sermon where you write a sermon through AI and then you write your own sermon and you say, okay, now that I've done the exegesis of the text, was AI so terrible or whatever? So this, you're going to use this as a template in your research for that activity. I've given that activity earlier, so that you can start doing some work on it already. It just gives you a bit more time. My notes activity 1 will be on Monday. I will give you a quiz, and I will give you the whole day to complete the quiz. In other words, the window of the quiz is Monday, the 5th of February. If you have any questions, contact me. If you're not part of the WhatsApp group, send me an email so they can arrange that you become part of that group. It is not a, we chat quickly with each other. It's a admin type of situation where we help one another. Enjoy the reading I gave you, and I will see you in the next lecture.